Today we're going to show you how to change the thermostat on your refrigerator. It's a pretty easy job. All you're going to need is a 1/4-inch nut driver, a putty knife, a pair of needle nose pliers, and both a Phillips and a flat blade screwdriver. Let me show you how we do it. Now before we begin this repair, the first thing we'll need to do is pull the refrigerator far enough to disconnect the power supply. Next, we'll open up the refrigerator door. And it's advisable to clear any items off of the top shelf. Now, the thermostat is located right behind this knob, so we're going to have to pull this housing out so that we can access the control. There are 2 1/4-inch hex head screws going up into the ceiling behind the control panel, and there are 2 in behind this escutcheon. So the first thing we'll do is pull the knobs off. Then with a thin blade putty knife, we'll come in from the top of that escutcheon and just gently slide that out. It's held in place with a couple of tabs on the front. That will tilt down and unhook from the bottom. There's a series of hooks across the bottom and a tab in each corner on the front. Now with our 1/4-inch nut driver, we can remove 2 screws from the front. And the 2 from the back side. And you'll need to support that as you remove the final screw. Now we can let that control drop down. The next thing we'll need to do is remove cover panel over the capillary tube and the cover from the air inlet. Now there's a single Phillips screw that holds that cover in place. We'll remove that. And a single Phillips screw that holds the cover over the air inlet. And tilt that air inlet away from the housing and pull it out. Now we have access to the control. So what we'll need to do is remove 1 Phillips screw in the center at the bottom of the control housing, and we'll loosen the one to the left of that. Now we'll need to remove the ground screw from the control and the 2 wires that go to the control itself. Use a pair of needle nose pliers and just slide those off. Now at this point we should be able to tilt that control mounting bracket up far enough to remove the 2 1/4-inch hex head screws that hold that control to the housing. Okay, now that we have the wire terminals removed from the control and the control removed from the housing, we next are going to unhook that capillary tube from a little retaining clamp over on the left-hand side here. Gently pull that out of there. Then we can lift the control and the cap tube right out through the back. Next we can dislodge the capillary tube from around the air inlet opening. Let's reroute that capillary tube around the connecting rod for the freezer control. We can remove the whole assembly and we can set this on a suitable work surface so that we can replace that plastic covering. Now that we have the control out of the refrigerator and on a suitable work surface, what we need to do next is remove this protective sleeve from the capillary tube so that we can reuse it on the new control. So we'll gently straighten this out as straight as you can make it. Take all of the kinks and bends out of it. And then we will pull that off of the old control. And we can discard the old control. Next, we will take the new control and very carefully uncoil the capillary tube that's on there. We don't want to damage this in any way at all. So again, get it as straight as you possibly can. And then we'll slide that covering over the new capillary tube. Just a little bit at a time so we don't kink it. And always do this by hand. We don't want to put a pair of pliers or anything that will crimp that capillary tube because it is a hollow tube. And we want to make sure that we don't have a lot of excess on the end. If there's just a quarter inch or so, that's fine. Otherwise, we would want to snip that off, and you have to be very careful that you don't touch the actual capillary tube. Now, before we install that back in the control panel, we can do a preliminary bend on that capillary tube, and it's roughly about the spacing of the width of your hand. Fold it, and if you remember how it laid in the air inlet duct assembly, it was tilted over. Again, being very careful not to kink it, just to give you a rough shape. We can do the final fitting once we have it installed. Now we're ready to put it back in the control panel. Now that we're ready to reinstall this control, the first thing we'll want to do is look at where the first bend has to be, where it exits the control housing and goes along the left-hand side wall. So we'll just visually hold it up, see where that first bend is going to be, and then just make a gentle bend in the tubing, again being very careful not to kink it. And we'll just lay it up in there, just try a fit. Looks about right. Here. Now next we'll center that control up on the mounting bracket, and we'll install one of the screws just to hold it in place. And we'll install the second one. Now we can put the second screw into the mounting bracket from beneath. And tighten up the one that we just loosened. Just do a visual and make sure that control is centered with the opening for the knob. And we're going to carefully slide that capillary tube into the little retaining clamp. Now we can reconnect the wires to the control, and remember to install the ground lead. Make sure they have a nice snug fit. Now we can lift the control housing up into place and secure it across the front. We can install the ones in the back end. These are the screws that have the larger flat washer molded to it. Now we can continue to locate the capillary tube. It's going to run along that back wall, and we want to make sure that it does not interfere with the rod that controls the air damper. Now there are little locking tabs that will hold that capillary tube to the air inlet housing, so we need to snap that firmly into place. And we'll start with the end of the capillary tube being as far back as the opening of the air inlet duct. We'll snap that one in first, and we'll wrap it around the front of the housing, and then snap in the bottom portion. Again, being very careful when making turns on it. Now, if you need to, you can use a flat blade screwdriver to press that insulated capillary tube into position. Make sure it's secure, then wrap it around the top again. Fold it around the leading edge of that housing so that it lays up against the wall. And we're ready to put the cover on. We'll make sure that this tab is inserted into the slotted opening on the back wall. You make sure that that cover does not bind up on the air inlet or on the capillary tube or the control arm for the freezer damper. Now we can install a cover over the capillary tube. We'll install the freezer knob just temporarily to make sure that that damper turns easily. We have full range of motion there. So we'll pop that knob back off. Now we'll install the escutcheon. We want to make sure that we engage tabs on the bottom first. And then the two end tabs to hold it in place. Replace the knobs. Now we're ready to plug the refrigerator in, and our repair is complete.